Hello, my friends, and welcome to Perfect Practice. I am so honored and excited for the conversation that we're going to embark on today. Today, I have with me somebody who's become a friend and I would say a distant mentor over the last few years, and that's Dr. Gabe Roberts. We actually met through one of our mutual friends, Dr. Bob Rakowski, and we're both trained in chiropractic. And I believe that he would say this as well, that we've evolved and we've acquired new skills and new capabilities over the years. And we both have a mutual interest in serving humanity and facilitating this amazing thing that we call life, and this journey that people go on to make it better, to make it happier, to make it more enlightened. And we love training practitioners. And so we have a lot in common. And you're going to really love what he's going to share with you today. And he's been working on something that has created some profound shifts and results for people. And anytime I encounter the right type of client, I always refer them to Dr. Roberts. So without further ado, Gabe, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Session. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here today.
Well, I was thinking about this before I even jumped on Zoom, and that is that this conversation has been many years in the making. And while it's been many years in the making, I think this is the perfect time for this conversation. I know you've been working busily behind the scenes. You've developed a training program. You've co-developed a protocol, which I know we're going to talk about today. You've just released a book, which I'm excited to get people to learn more about. Tell us a little bit more about where your journey started. So let's go back to chapter one.
Okay, so chapter one, I would say just kind of looking for an answer for myself. And of course, this introduced me to the healing arts. And like you mentioned, I was a personal trainer and big into nutrition and stuff. And naturally, that gravitated me towards chiropractic. And much like yourself, I found that uh, the education was good, but it was not enough. I was unsatisfied with, um, the amount of material it gave me compared to what it takes to initiate healing in a person. So, the healing that I particularly was looking for, I didn't quite understand even what it was at the point, but it was a calling. And the calling was, from my own childhood experiences. And in my book, I talk about the first chapter. My childhood prepared me for this work, and it just kind of talks about the first few years of my life were just severe trauma, alcoholic stepfather, lots of physical abuse, lots of emotional abuse, and of course, like most of us, we don't think that those things impact us to a degree, and this had kind of a pain inside of me my whole life. And of course, going through chiropractic school, becoming a diplomat in nutrition, acupuncturist, all these different things. Um, I was looking for some kind of answer for that deep pain. And it finally dawned on me one day when it was the mental side that I was not really addressing. I was addressing the physical side, I was addressing the energetic side, but the mental side was largely untouched. And once I started to dedicate hours a day of just studying everything I could get my hands on that had to do with the mind and how to do with reprogramming the mind, I started applying these things to myself, and very quickly I noticed dents in that pain. And I had a number of addictions beforehand, and I noticed the addictions started to slip away easily. Like today, I don't even drink coffee. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that um, it's just something I worked on myself one day, and I woke up and I've just naturally gravitate towards water now. And it's rather strange to think that I've always enjoyed coffee, and I will still have a few sips every now and then, but I find that I function better without it. And that's rather odd, but it was just one of those things that unfolded when I started working on that deeper side of my mind and continuing to take dents out of that pain until the pain was completely gone. And then a few years back, Tiffany and I said, look, we're going to do a webinar. We're going to do some kind of online seminar, and I had some I had some guest speakers, and at the end of this webinar, I introduced one technique, and the technique is also in the book as well. And when I introduced this technique, I had a tremendous amount of practitioners that were watching this webinar, and overnight they emailed me. They were like, "What is that? I want to know more about that." And so, of course, that kind of set the stage for us to continue to evolve and get this out into people's hands because it's very, very, very practical, simple ways of changing that deeper side of us that is many times inaccessible to us.
Yeah, one of my friends, Joe Polish, who you might recognize,
Right.
uh, he's really big on addiction. And one of the things that he says is ask not why the addiction, ask why the pain, because the addict is usually using that behavior to drown out, some sort of pain that they're either conscious of or in some cases unconscious of. And addiction can be to food, it can be to drugs, it can be to caffeine or, certain beverages. We live in a very addicted society, which to me tells me that we live in a society that is drowning a lot of pain. You talked about, physical abuse. I know there's a lot of people that experience sexual abuse. There's a lot of people that experience emotional abuse. How might that show up in an adult? So somebody who's listening to this, I know there's different forms of pain and different manifestations of these experiences. Or what are some examples in case somebody's listening? And I want practitioners who are listening to this not to just listen for themselves, because we're human too. We go through the human experience. We didn't just fall from the sky with our degrees. And I want them to listen for some of their clients, or even if you're parents, like just pay attention to some of the ways that we parent, which can lead to adverse childhood experiences, which can later manifest into disease. So I know there could be a variety of different ways that it shows up, but maybe you could showcase some examples of how this shows up in your practice or how it might be showing up in the practitioner's office.
Right. So some of the ways that these rather, and they're under the category of big T trauma, what you're talking about. See, there's two categories of the way that we're wounded, and trauma comes from the Greek word for wound, and it's basically a wound that is sustained, and the wound is a holographic imprint in our psyche. That's probably the best way to describe it. And whenever we have physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, these are going to show up in the dynamics as our adulthood of uh, deep senses of shame, deep senses of anger, resentment, anger, and they're also going to show up as symptoms because there's something about us when we're little. We develop these coping mechanisms, and the way a child thinks between the ages of especially 0 to 5 is completely different than a way an adult thinks and perceives the world. And during those years, um, if something happens to them, their tendency is to take it personal because they're so new to the world that they're taking in everything and literally building a self-image. In my opinion, this term is over-franchised a lot, but it has its place. The self-image is everything to a person. That's the dynamics of how they see themselves alone, how they see themselves when there's no outside noise, when they're in their own skin, in their own place by themselves, without outside stimulus. There's an image that we put on when we go out. We do our hair, we dress a certain way, we walk a certain way, but we all have this other image that we have deep inside, and that's formed between 0 to 5. And every experience we have during that time forms in little splotches, imagine a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle getting put together. And every time we have an experience, good or bad, it's like a puzzle piece gets put in place. And by around 5, that puzzle is complete. And it is going to influence and skew and color the way we see ourselves and the way we see our world. So if those times we have some kind of boundary violation, we can be very angry about it. But because we're a child, it's not like we can fight that off, especially if it's from a parent, because fighting it off, a child fighting off in a threat at 0 to 5, oftentimes will put them in even a more dangerous situation. So there's a hopelessness that gets formed, and they because their brain is forming, their self-image is forming, they don't fight that off, and that oftentimes leads to a tendency to compensate for that. So if they had the impression that they weren't good enough, that forms an impression that they're not good enough, and oftentimes it will lead to a coping mechanism as an adult where they're doing everything they can to be good enough. They get degrees. They they overwork themselves. They're the people that uh, don't cause conflict. They're the people that don't stick up for themselves many times. They're the ones that don't want to make waves, and they want to blend in with the crowd as much as possible to avoid any kind of conflict. And the problem with that is they don't express themselves fully. And when they don't express themselves fully, there's repression. And anytime there's repression, there's repressed energy. And anytime for every unit of energy a person represses, it requires an equal amount, if not greater amount of energy to keep it there.
Hmm.
So depending on the load they have and the amount of pressure that's building up in them will determine how fast and how great the number of manifestations begin to express themselves as symptoms and pathology.
Wow, that's a great explanation. Thank you for breaking that down for us. And as you're sharing that, I'm almost thinking of um, just helping people understand that between 0 and let's say 1 or 2, we don't really have verbal communication capabilities, right? So we may not even be able to express what that trauma was because there may not be words that we've associated with that experience. So maybe you can talk about that because I think that's really
Right.
important for people to recognize.
Right. And that is a great point. And just to kind of add a little bit more to what you were saying earlier, you're absolutely right. Joe Polish is right. Every addiction has some kind of pain, and that pain comes from something that a need not met, which is just, I would say, global. The only people that don't have childhood trauma on the globe today of some sort are isolated pockets of tribal Aboriginal people. So don't let the word trauma fool you. I have a number of people that contact me and say, I had great childhood growing up. I never had trauma. And sure enough, there was something in there, a need not met or something else. So that being said, when we talk about 0 to 1 or 0 to 3, um, many times how can experiences in the womb um, impact somebody in their adulthood years later when the growing fetus has no idea what, let's say, verbal English is, right? Well, it's still recorded, and the minute of conception is the moment when we learn the most. Now,
Mm,
I never knew this until I've done this work. And like my previous client today is just one example of thousands. See, he has complex PTSD, a list of things about shame and self-love, and I even remember years back a point that you brought up in the functional medicine organization was a supplement company contacted you and said, "Hey, what is the biggest deficiency you see?" And you said self-worth, self-worth, right? Uh, Same thing. So these occurrences, and whenever we work together, this patient, I asked his subconscious mind to take us to the very source, the very seed planting, when this wound happened. And sure enough, we're in the womb. So it's not even something after birth. How can this be with, how can something that happened in the womb uh, later manifest as something like this to a 45-year-old man? Because at the moment of conception is when we're the most absorbent. And it's just data getting absorbed. So it doesn't matter what it is, it's all getting absorbed. It has no subconscious, nothing to compare anything against. It's just getting absorbed. Now, as it gets absorbed, it starts to get grouped. So your conscious mind can group things linearly. Like you can think back to a memory and you can think there was a beginning of it, there was kind of a middle, and there was an ending of this experience I had. Your conscious mind groups things linearly. Your subconscious groups things by what they have in common. That's why if you're in a bad mood, if you have an emotional shift and you're angry, suddenly you're thinking of things that happened 5 years ago that have a resonance to anger. Suddenly it's coming up because it groups them in kind of like a cluster of grapes. So when you're in the womb and you're absorbing these experiences and they begin to get clustered, again, it's not verbal. The baby's not hearing, something and thinking, "Oh my gosh, that's too bad, Mom. I'm sorry to hear that." But it's just data that gets absorbed. And what happens with every perception we absorb, we also form a protective barrier called a critical faculty. And in my book, I go into huge depth on that because that's a missing piece oftentimes when it comes to change work. Critical faculty protects every perception you have. So if I were to tell you the grass is blue, there's a moment you hear it, you take it in, but then some kind of door closes and you're like, no, it's not, it's green, right? And that critical faculty protects every perception you've ever had, good or bad, it doesn't matter. That's why you can tell a depressed person you're a worthy, valuable person. Critical faculty slams shut because it's not how they perceive themselves. It's protecting. So as this data gets accumulated in a growing fetus, it's just data accumulated. And as they start to grow older, they start to learn the language. They start to learn if it's Chinese or English or whatever they start to speak. And that data then is accumulated in such a way that it gives meaning. So suddenly an insult that happened after conception now has true meaning when they're, 15 or 20 or 25 years old. So at conception is when we learn the most. And the way that I would try to express this is let's say my wife and Aria together, homeschooling, learned Spanish and I didn't never learn Spanish. I was up here studying something else. And my wife learned Spanish and wrote me a really touching letter in Spanish. Just heartfelt letter, really poured her emotions into it and gave me this letter. I could read the letter and it means nothing to me because I'm sitting here looking at it. There's a lot of emotion. She put a lot of heart into it, but I'm sitting here and I can't derive meaning. Now, what happens if I started learning Spanish and I later go back and read that letter? Suddenly I'm like, wow. So it's the same thing with
Mm.
how a fetus absorbs data that is equivalent to the letter that you're not able to interpret until later on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Question that comes up for me and might be coming up for others is it the mother's perception of what's happening that's creating the data set that's coming in, or is it just absorb like maybe explain to me how much the mother's filtration of the experience plays a role, if at all?
That's a great question. At that time, and this is why 0 to 5, because when does a child know they're their own self? Around that time.
Hmm.
Up until then, um, they don't associate themselves as something different. Whatever happens to mommy happens to them because they think about it. They're you know two at one point. Mom and developing baby are the same. So it is the perceptions that mom has. There is whatever happens to mommy gets imprinted into the baby. If mommy feels threatened, baby feels threatened right away. And there's a tremendous amount of research that shows this. They can, I shared a video a while back of um, like an ultrasound type video scan, and they were looking in the womb of a pregnant mother. You could see this fetus developing in there. You could see the head and the spine, and there was a loud crashing noise with two people arguing. I think it was an Italian. You could hear glass smashing, but the minute that crash happened, the glass and the arguing, you could see that fetus jump up in their entire spine, bend because of the loud noise and the threat that mom felt in that. Um, but it is in part whatever mom's interpreting gets immediately imprinted into the baby.
Yeah, so important for us to recognize, especially as fathers, that we, kind of protect mom from stressful experiences as best we can, and also in turn protect our child, and uh, as much as we can reduce future human suffering, because we don't always realize when we're young. Like I didn't know a lot of what I know now. I'm sure The same might be the case for you as well. And in hindsight, of course, it's 2020, and all we can do is pay it forward to those that are willing to listen. That this is so important. Um, One of the things
Right.
that I'd be curious of is like, how does this manifest in our offices? So what might somebody come in with? I know you mentioned PTSD, and that seems, maybe a little bit more obvious, but what are some more subtle manifestations of these traumatic experiences that we have? How might that show up?
Usually, whenever I have a patient sit with me, I'm usually the last line. So they have polyautoimmune. And they've usually tried many different approaches. They're usually the people that come to me have already, for the most part, cleaned up their life. They've cleaned up the way they eat, things like that. And there's just still something not right. And I train my doctors this way. We have a psychosomatic university accredited PhD program, and I always tell them one of the best ways to mess up a healing session is to assume you know what the problem is.
Mm,
Go into a session assuming you know, oh, I know exactly where this is. You have RA, great. I worked with a lady that had RA a few weeks ago. I got this. No, it's so different for everyone, and the only source that knows is their subconscious mind, and it could be something so little, but it could also be something quite big where it was a boundary violation or something else. Um, but in the book, I give the example of what I term as a self-mutilation complex. Many people say, "Well, what's a self-mutilation complex?" It is not something a person's consciously aware of. It is probably one of the most overlooked, misunderstood concepts that contribute to a person having malignancy or autoimmune conditions. And it forms, again, in that template between 0 to 5 when a child learns at that early age and their jigsaw puzzle is getting put together, that they have the impression that mom and dad would be better off if they were never around. So mom and dad are so stressed out. It might not be the case. It might not be the case at all. Um, there's a need that we all require of connection, without a doubt. And that connection is not met just because your parents love you. So it might not be the case, but if the child perceives that they get the idea that mom and dad are so stressed out that I would have been better if I was never born, that gets implanted into that template. And then they go through life experiences that start to reinforce and compound that perception. Around 35 to 45, symptoms start to show up because the subconscious mind, and that's one thing this book really, I'm really proud of it. It goes into a tremendous details on the subconscious and conscious mind, more so than I've seen in other books. It's to give you an idea of how the two behave, the two aspects of our mind. And the subconscious mind, first and foremost, is the most powerful goal achieving agency known to humanity. It is, if we think of our conscious awareness, the part we are aware of, we could say it has the power of an automobile engine. The subconscious mind has the power of the Milky Way galaxy. So it's the most powerful goal achieving agency known to humanity, but it also cannot judge a single decision put in it. So anything put in between 0 to 5 forms that critical faculty, and the subconscious will work with ruthless efficiency to make it into form. And oftentimes it has something to do with mom and dad were stressed out, um, and I'm not supposed to be here, and that might not be a full-fledged operational program yet until 35 to 45 years old when there's been enough experiences, what are called secondary sensitizing events. They've compounded so much that they add enough weight to um, that initial wound that it's like a scale tips suddenly, and the subconscious mind goes, "We're not supposed to be here," and it
mm,
starts showing symptom after symptom after symptom. And if you mute the symptom, it shows up another way, or the person unwillingly, unintentionally sabotages their results, even though they're doing their best. This is something that came from Vincent Felitti, the founder of the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experience study. He had an obesity clinic, and he found that he could um, tremendously help people lose lots of weight very quickly through exercise and various programs, but he couldn't keep the weight off of them. And this is something Tiffany and I noticed too, working with diabetes type 2. We could get them, you know, doing some breathing exercises for stress, eating, learning about fasting, getting rid of the processed food, eating real food. And soon enough, 6 months to a year later, a majority of them would be right back to the diabetic ways. Why? We're working on something that didn't match the self-image that was responsible
Mhm.
for creating the diabetes in the first place. Um, but in this book, I give an example of a patient named Sarah who came in and had tried a number of different avenues, and I give a little bit more clarity on some of the work I do. Regressed her to cause. I took her back to that memory. I'm just asking her questions. She's anchored in the safety, and we've done some general negativity and specific negativity clearing first. So she's coming in with this big monstrosity, just doesn't feel good, doesn't life's not fair, got all this pain, nothing's worked. And I start working with her, and we get this thing down to a little piece here. And then I say, okay, now the subconscious mind is very clear on where we're going. Take me the very key event that has everything to do with this autoimmune. And suddenly she is an infant, and she's describing herself in the crib. And I said, are you inside a building or outside a building? What are you sensing? And she's surprised. She has little infant hands, but she's in that cluster. In that, I said, subconscious stores things by what they have in common. She went right to the key, memory, perception, that had everything to do with this. She's describing her hands. I said, are you alone or with people? She goes, I can hear my parents. My parents are right there. And I said, okay, what's going on? And suddenly her face changes. She starts bawling. And I said, what are you becoming aware of? And I always tell them, you don't have to share everything. If you don't want to share something, you don't have to, but I'm looking for a specific moment is what I'm doing. She starts bawling and she says, they're arguing. And my mom says, I'm a mistake. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm a mistake. I'm a mistake. And that right there got programmed into this little baby's self-image. And here it was manifesting as chronic illness, um, you know, 3.5 decades later. So that's one thing I've learned is we hear a lot of things about subconscious mind, and it's very important, but the foundation for that again is from our earliest years. And oftentimes if we're trying to do some kind of subconscious work we learn about or something, we can be working on it, but we might be working superficially in it and get some and get some good change, but maybe it's not as deep as we need, or maybe it didn't get the change we want, or sometimes it can also get worse. I've noticed people for years, I talked to them about things like affirmations and or layered hypnosis, a person getting into a trance state, they're relaxing, they're listening to headphones, and the headphones are, you find it real easy to care about yourself, you find it real easy to make the right choices, and they're putting in positive things in their subconscious, and the deeper part of their subconscious says, who are you kidding? I know who I am, and it's not this. And it flexes its might to prove it, and suddenly their symptoms are much worse. So just a couple of things. I might have went off on a tangent there a bit, but just a couple of things on how it works and what we see clinically, and what our aim is for whenever we're working with people is to get back to that initial seed planting, because
Mhm.
that's when they literally shift who they are as a person.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It kind of the visual that's coming up for me is like a fractal equation, which are self-similar repeating patterns that are
Right.
created from very simple equations. And so something that was said that was so subtle, um, that the parents obviously, um, you know, maybe they didn't even mean it, right? But as you said, the brain can't process meaning; it just receives the information and clusters it with like grapes, as you mentioned, which was a great visual, by the way. So thank you for using such great metaphors and analogies to explain all this. And then it just keeps kind of spiraling and spiraling, and then eventually it shows up in adulthood. One of the things that is coming up for me is that I feel like our these adverse childhood experiences, um, and phrases that were uttered or said, also show up in business. And since we work with a lot of clinicians, I know you do and I do, many of whom unfortunately struggle in business because they might have these childhood experiences that are causing them to play small or feel like they're not enough. Maybe you can talk about how it might show up in an entrepreneur's journey as well.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. That was definitely relevant in my case. And again, that's to find this out. I had to really study myself in great depths. You and I met at an organo conference in Las Vegas years back, and one of the speakers, um, I think maybe her name was, it wasn't the Diane we know. It was a different Diane from who lives in Colorado, I believe. There's a daughter and mother, and she was on stage, and
Deanna.
Deanna, that's it.
Yeah.
That's the one. She was on stage and she said this, and for any practitioner, this is relevant. She said, if you're giving away the product and you're not having success selling it, it's not the product. And when she said that, something pinged in me and I wasn't sure what, and that was it. That's as far as the conversation went. It's like, wait, tell me more. What do you mean by that? What's okay? If that's the truth, what's going on deeper, And but that pinged in me, and um also being around Bob Rakowski at one time. I went to his house in Houston with many other wonderful people, wonderful practitioners, and it went around the table in his backyard. We were all talking, and I remember flying home, and it dawned on me, my results that I could do in clinical practice did not match my results I was having at home. They didn't match the results of who I was. They didn't match the results. I was an addict. I'd smoke pot every night just to get to sleep, you know? Um, and when I realized those two didn't match, it was a big eye opener for me. And it will show up if a person feels like they're not successful. They're going to have um, difficult uh, talking to people. But not only that, we are non-physical beings. We are non-physical beings, and we are conditioned, and our society and our culture, government, anything that has any kind of influence from government is supporting this idea that we are just flesh robots and there's nothing beyond the five senses. When that's the farthest thing from the truth. We
Mm.
are non-physical beings. We're made of quantum particles, and these quantum particles have a dance that the rest of the universe is always connected to. And I go into a tremendous amount of evidence, the studies on that in this book. And I am about 90 pages into my next book right now, which is going to be a masterpiece compared to this one. I put a lot into this one, but I'm putting a ton more into this one. And I talk about these non-physical things showing up. And what she meant when she was on stage was if you don't have the vibration, if you don't have uh, the energetic signature of success, it doesn't matter what you do, how good your marketing is, how great your product is, um, how good your intention is. Um, People are going to pick up on that because we are only aware of 0.006%. From Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's research, we only have a conscious awareness of 0.006%, and about 7% of that is through our language. The rest of it is all body language and nonverbal cues and this um, non-physical connection that we all carry. And so many times, whenever I hear of somebody starting functional medicine practice or somebody starting chiropractic or something, many times a question that comes up is, hey, if you could tell this person one piece of advice, here's a new practitioner. a new chiropractor, a new, energy medicine practitioner, acupuncturist, whatever. What's one piece of advice you would give them starting out? Mine is always the same. You have to build a self-image of success. You need to feel success. You need to know that you deserve it. You need to know you're doing right things, and you need to know that the things that happen to you are over. Now, that's way easier said than done, but study yourself and figure out your cues, figure out your triggers, and do whatever you have to where you feel like you deserve success. Because when you deserve it, when you feel like you deserve it and it matches you, people come out of the woodwork. I have people that contact me, Moscow, Russia. I had a woman contact me from Moscow, Russia. No idea how she found me. And she said, "Oh, I was just drawn to seek you out." It's
Mm.
non-physical stuff. And that's the key for a person to really have success that continues to flow. That's beyond your marketing, beyond all that. All that stuff is wonderful though. Don't get me wrong. It's very important. What's most important though is to know that we live in a energetic world, things beyond the five senses. And we're like I think maybe it's Dr. Joe Dispenza that said, we're like big electromagnets. And it is true. Our heart gives off a measurable uh, field of energy called a torus field. And that's a big part of what holographic manipulation therapy is. It's playing on this holographic dashboard that's in front of us, manipulating data and changing things that immediately change stuff on the inside of us. And this is electromagnetic field. So what can a magnet do? If one side attracts, one side repels. And it's depending on what's going on inside of us, what we're emotionally involved in most of the time is going to really influence that magnet's ability to attract and repel things. So uh, I have a couple of one of the things we do in our university is I want all my students to be successful. So I teach them the idea of get away from competition. Get
Mm.
away from that completely. You're all creators of your own reality. Regardless of what he's doing or she's doing, get away from the competitive mindset and you stay in your mindset. And time again, I'll have an example where a chiropractor or somebody's talking with me and they go, "Oh, this person, I had a new patient and they had to cancel and they didn't reschedule." And I'm like, "So you're getting emotionally involved with that. What you need to do is shift your mindset into what you're doing and be happy at what you're doing. Don't think about this person." And within a few weeks, they had 3 or 4 people replace that one person. That's an example of that electromagnetic signature at work. And if we honor that system within us, that technology that's amazingly built into us, we can literally create the lives we want. And that's what, like you said, that's what makes life so amazing is to know how powerful we are.
Yeah, so beautifully said and so true. I know that for a lot of people who are perhaps new to this way of thinking, thinking in a quantum level, it can be a very foreign concept. And to me, at one point, it was too, until I started playing in that field and realizing that, yeah, I am the creator of my own destiny. And when I want an appointment to cancel, for example, because sometimes I may have a conflict, I just put that out there in the ether and they contact me and say, "Hey, something isn't working here. I won't be able to make it." And part of me is like, "It's okay, don't worry about it." And the other part of me is like, "Yes,
Yep.
this works." So
No
I think
accident.
no accidents, exactly. So we are co-creators of our reality. And I think it's really important for anyone who's listening to this to recognize that and tap into that that capability that we have. A lot of times we're co-creating our reality. And an example I like to give is you think of someone and you're about to call them and you pick up the phone and they're already calling you. And most people would say, "Oh, that's crazy. I was just about to call you." Whereas perhaps yourself, I know myself, I would say, "Hey, I was literally asking you to call me and here you are calling me." Instead of calling it crazy, I know it's a capability that we all have. And when you start recognizing it and you start recognizing the subtle ways that these capabilities are showing up for you, you just start leaning into it a lot more. I've been doing this with my son. There's this one red light leaving our neighborhood. There's a light that we catch, and because we're coming off a small street, it usually, it's red longer than the other main street. And so now we have this thing where we just visualize that light being green every time we get to it. And it used to be that 8 out of 10 times it was red, and now 8 out of 10 times it's green. So we give each other a high five, just understanding that we're quantumly entangled with everything. And I'll tell you this one story. I think you'll find this fascinating. We are on our way to a basketball game. And about 10 minutes before we get there, I say, "Watch this, Devin. I'm going to catch a t shirt today." And those t shirts, they fire off from those little air guns. And he's like, "Oh, whatever, dad." I'm like, "No, trust me, I'm going to catch a t shirt." And we get there. And in the second quarter, lo and behold, they fire off a t-shirt. Just at the very end, the guy's getting ready to run back into the locker room, fires a t-shirt off. Nobody in my section's paying any attention to it, and it lands right in my hand. And it was just like, it's amazing what we're capable of. However, we don't always give ourselves that permission. And when we do, a whole new world opens up. It's almost like we're reborn in a way uh, that's so remarkable. And I love talking about this and having these types of conversations. So thank you for enlightening me. I also wanted to call attention to your book because you mentioned it a few times. It's called From Pain to Purpose. Um, and people can get it on Amazon. And I think that's a great investment of their time and energy to read that book because it's going to talk a little bit more and go deeper into some of the topics that we talked about today. Uh, what else?
Right.
What's a question I should be asking you? Because I know there's a lot of different paths that we can go down, and we're just kind of scratching the surface of the surface. But what's something that you'd like to share with people that you feel like, in addition to what you've already discussed, is really important for them to know?
Uh, well, it's easy for us to talk about, and that's what my world is all about. That's what my focus is. That's what holographic manipulation therapy is all about. And even this greater work is called psychosomatic medicine that I work with is teaching people this stuff and sh taking them back to the point where they are the most primal and they where the farther you go back in the memories, like say to 3 years old or 5 years old or something, the more leverage you have over your entire system from then on, because those are the most powerful and influential memories, and helping them understand their quantum creators. And they don't get it. They're, conditioned to think otherwise. They don't believe it about themselves. One of the things that I love telling people is you don't have to believe any of this will work. Somebody comes to me and they say, "Oh, my rheumatoid arthritis just hurts so bad." And they just want to get free of the pain. And I say, "Look, you don't have to believe anything I tell you. You don't have to even believe this will work." And they're like, "What?" And I said, "All I want you to do is participate. Don't actively fight the process, and you're gonna get all the change work you want." Um, but when we're talking about things like telepathic, most everyone has heard about taking an aspirin to prevent a heart attack, right? The scientific results that are verified through statistics of that actually working is actually 0.03%. That's the actual result. So 0.03% chance of an aspirin uh, influencing your outcome of having a heart attack. Enough result for Bayer to put that on the label. Telepathic, on the other hand, is actually 5 times greater. It's 0.11. So the telephone game we play and the manipulating of matter with our mind, making the light go from mostly red to mostly green, is very scientific. It's very valid. And so that's one of the most important things that people need to realize, because it can sound good. People can be listening and go, "Yeah, I'm a quantum creator." But they have to understand they have so much conditioning that's that's told them otherwise, that they could be thinking they're a quantum creator and just be at the surface level of their mind, where everything else is resisting that, and oftentimes they go back to their way of being. But that's what's needed to get us out of this mess we're in today. Out of
Mm,
all the way the world is, everyone has to have a shift in their perception of how they believe about themselves and how they believe about the world. And that is the answer for our our answer to humanity, you know. is this, it's not it's not that humanity's evolving into something else. I don't believe that. I hear a lot of that. I don't believe that. Um, what's going on is we're getting back to the source of where we were. There's this book called Memoirs of an Addicted Brain by Mark Lewis, and he's a very brilliant neurologist, and he has all kinds of addictions from his own trauma, cough medicine as a teen, and alcohol, and it gets all the way up to like heroin and much stronger drugs. And at one point, he is in Malaysia with a group of colleagues, and they're hacking through the jungle with a machete. And as he hacks through this jungle, he comes across these two natives, this man and son. And the way that they were looking at him and his colleagues struck Dr. Mark Lewis to his core because they were totally grounded in who they were. They were not aggressive, nor were they afraid at all. They had just an immense confidence that you could just feel radiating off of them.
Mm.
And just the presence of them excited him so much to where he thought, oh my gosh, that exists in humanity today. Wow, I could be like that. And I think that that is what's necessary for all of us to get back to our true essence, to get back to our true roots of who we were before we started to uh, gather this contamination and this pollution and this trauma of what's commonly referred to earth trauma school for our spirit, you know, um, and get back to the essence that this man and son demonstrated.
Mm.
So that's it exists today. It's just a matter of peeling back the layers and finding our true self.
Mm. This leads me to my last two questions, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners have as well. One is, how young can you start this process? So I'm thinking of my 13-year-old. I'm sure I said something or done something unconsciously that potentially has the capability of leading to dysfunction in the future. And can this work be done remotely, or does it have to be done in person?
Great questions. I will be the first to say, admit I've traumatized my kids. I learned this stuff too little, too late. That being said, you can always build perceptions because kids, teenagers always just need connection. They need real connection. If they don't get it from you, they're going to get it from somewhere, whether it's social media, whether it's video games, whether it's peers. But that's the ace we have up our sleeve is they always need connection. And we need to meet them where they're at, not try to force it. Show interest in where they're at and what they're doing, and we can build that connection with them. How young? I've we've done work with 6 and 7, 8 year olds, that can understand basic concepts. One particular technique, I had a woman, actually, she ran a doctor's office, and her daughter had an earache, and uh, it was maybe 7 out of 10 earache, and we did some holographic manipulation work and instantly reduced it down to a maybe a 1. And she was just blown away. She goes, "What was that?" And I said, "Well, it's the same thing you mentioned, this fractal pattern of as above, so below. And we are basically holographic fractal information processing systems. And if you learn the language of the code of how to talk to neurology, and this is the thing that brought me from chiropractic to psychosomedicine. Not only was it my own journey to resolve my own emotional pain, but I found early on that the pain that most of my patients carried, most of, if not all of them, was in fact emotional, was in fact something from other than what they are presenting to me in practice. And from a neurology standpoint, your brain can't tell the difference between physical pain and emotional pain. It's just data. You can take a you can take an ibuprofen if you're feeling heartbroken from a breakup, and the emotional pain will dissipate. So it's just data. So early enough to where the child can follow simple instructions. That and they don't need the heavier stuff. that we use for like terminal illness, they would need something lighter and it would work beautifully for them. And they don't even really need any instructions because they're so imaginative on their own, right?
Mm.
And I'm sorry, what was the question after that?
Can the work be done remotely?
I work 100% through, I work 100% through Zoom. So I am 100% virtual. Uh, I love that. I actually got the idea from you long ago. I was virtual even before COVID hit. I
Mhm.
remember you talking about that, but kind of being the future. And I've I've never regretted it since. I love working from home, being virtual. And the beautiful thing about this work is it can be done anywhere at any time, um, through Zoom, and everything about the work too can be done on self. So it's not just a matter of you need somebody to do it. Uh, it does take time. Like some of my therapists that are getting master's degrees and PhDs, they aren't able to just jump in and do a regression on themselves until they learn some steps and they start to, first it's very mechanical and then it becomes like tool like, and then it becomes really smooth, and next thing you know it's a real easy process to where, I mean, I can drive down the road and do very complex interventions on myself if something triggers me or something else.
Mm.
um, so but it's 100% through Zoom. That's how I work. It doesn't have to be, but for the freedom and the convenience, for people to be able to do this in their own home is always a, and you know that it's always a nice benefit.
Home court advantage for everyone.
Right.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that because I know there's people listening that can greatly benefit from this, and being able to do it remotely is a huge help. Where can people go to learn more? We'll happy to share the link to the book if you want us to send them to Amazon, or if you want to send them somewhere else, please share that link. And where can people get a hold of you? Where can they learn perhaps how to work with you individually, or how can they learn more about the school?
So we have a number of options. Working with me, working with a trained certified therapist who's on top of her game is an option as well. And then you can also work in the student clinic where we have doctors, chiropractors, professionals in the process of earning their degree. You can also work with them. And of course, that's a much more cost-effective way to work with a student. But we have a number of options. Um, the best way to get a hold of us would be the subconscioushhealer.com, okay, is our website. And if you send our staff an email, and that would be elevate your field, just how it's spelled, elevate your field at pm.me, we can send you all kinds of different options, and also any pamphlets, or if you're interested in what Psychosomatic University teaches. I am proud to say that it is leading edge on taking healers and turning them into super healers, taking people that have chronic terminal illness and be able to give them some kind of um, uh, good change on that, and changing their perspectives very much, and easy, practical ways. So
I love that. Well, thank you, Gabe. I appreciate this opportunity. Really enjoyed our conversation. It was very grounding and reassuring that there is hope for everyone and anyone who's interested in doing the work. We'll be happy to share these links, and I wish you continued success. I'm going to pick up a copy of your book here as soon as we jump off, and I'd love to perhaps do a second interview where we can dive a little bit deeper after I've had a chance to experience the book and read it. I've been following your work on Facebook for many years, and I still remember our encounter in Las Vegas. You were with Aria and Tiffany, and it was just amazing to meet you in person. And I absolutely love what you share, and I try to share it as often as I can. So keep doing the work. The world needs it. And I'm glad that we had this opportunity to chat today.
thank you, Sachin. It was fantastic, great conversation, and looking forward to the future.
Thank you, my friend.